and such in the outside world, but also to attend to our own selves, our own intimate relationships and communities, to consider how and where we've been constricted and how creating more space for ourselves and each other might contribute to liberation and the flourishing of all. So come, let us gather together. I'd like to invite Lindeen, I think you're over there, to come and offer the words for the chalice lighting. This was written by the Reverend Dr. David Breeden. We gather into this circle. We gather into this circle of care to dream, to envision, to embody and achieve the compassion we dream, the justice we envision, the dignity of each in an ever-growing circle of love and justice. Our covenant is the silk that joins our congregation together in a web of interconnection. If you would like to, you are invited to join me in reading it. We covenant together to make a welcoming community, to walk together in the way of truth and love, to seek the life of the Spirit as it is known by each person, to support each other in thought, word, and deed as we work to build a better world. Our first hymn this morning is When Our Heart is in a Holy Place. And I am wondering if people in the sanctuary might like to stand, because we do that when we sing hymns. So if you want to, you're invited to stand up. And if you'd like to hum quietly, that's good too with masks on. And people at home, please stand up if you feel like it. Sing out if you feel like it.
When our heart is in a holy place,
Thank you. It was good to hear humming in the sanctuary. In today's Time for All Sages, we will hear an old Zen Buddhist tale about the power of a generous heart, retold by author John Muth and set within a story about new friends. I'm glad I found a video because the illustrations are really lovely on this. Let's enjoy it.
Hey everyone, today we're going to be reading Zen Shorts by John J. Muth. Zen Shorts. Michael, there's a bear outside, said Carl. A what? Called Michael. A bear! He's really big, and he's in the backyard. What's he doing? Michael asked. He's sitting. He has an umbrella, said Carl. An umbrella? By the time the boys got outside, their sister Addie was already talking with him. I'm sorry for arriving unannounced, said the bear. The wind carried my umbrella all the way from my backyard to your backyard. I thought I would retrieve it before it became a nuisance. He spoke with a slight panda accent. Michael introduced himself. Then Addie introduced Carl because Carl was shy around bears he didn't know. And this is how Addie, Michael, and Carl met Stillwater. The next day, Addie went to have tea with Stillwater. Hello, Addie said as she stepped inside. Come in, a faraway voice called. Then she heard the voice say, Oh, yes. Come out. Stillwater was in the backyard. He was in a tent. This is a birthday present for my Uncle Rye, Stillwater said. He always gives presents on his birthday to celebrate the day he was born. I like it so much that I'm not staying in my house right now. Stillwater invited Addie to sit with him. You brought me some cake, said Stillwater. That was very nice of you. Is it your birthday? He asked. No, said Addie. It's not mine either, said Stillwater. But let me give you a gift for my uncle's birthday. I will tell you a story. Uncle Rye and the Moon. My Uncle Rye lived alone in a small house up in the hills. He didn't own many things. He lived a simple life. One evening, he discovered he had a visitor. A robber had broken into the house and was rummaging through my uncle's few belongings. The robber didn't notice Uncle Rye, and when my uncle said hello, the robber was so startled he almost fell down. My uncle smiled at the robber and shook his hand. Welcome. How nice of you to visit. The robber opened his mouth to speak, but couldn't think of anything to say. Because Rye never lets anyone leave empty-handed, he looked around the tiny hut for a gift for the robber. But there was nothing to give. The robber began to back toward the door. He wanted to leave. At last, Uncle Rye knew what to do. He took off his only robe, which was old and tattered. Here, he said, please take this. The robber thought my uncle was crazy. He took the robe, dashed out the door, and escaped into the night. My uncle sat and looked at the moon, its silvery light spilling over the mountains, making all things quietly beautiful. Poor man, lamented my uncle. All I had to give him was my tattered robe. If only I could have given him this wonderful moon. Your uncle sounds nice, said Addie. I don't think I could have given away my only robe. I know how that is, said Stillwater, but there's always the moon. That was a good story, said Addie. Thank you, said Stillwater. And this is good cake. Thanks, said Addie. I made it myself.
One is on her way. Oh, you are? Okay. Well, then we have song to usher you out. You are invited to go to your classroom with your teachers now. Yay. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day. And if you ever doubt yourself, remember us who love you well. We know all the gifts you bring into the world each day. So thank you for your loving hand, your loving heart, your loving ways. Thank you for the gifts you bring into the world each day.
Our Share the Plate partner for February is the Southern Environmental Law Center, SELC. And it is the South's largest and most effective nonprofit, nonpartisan environmental advocate and protector. SELC's mission is to protect the basic right to clean air, clean water, and a livable climate, to preserve our region's natural treasures and rich biodiversity, and to provide a healthy environment for all. Your generosity, besides being a wonderful way to evidence your loving heart, supports the Southern Environmental Law Center in effectively taking on issues at the intersection of environmental and social justice, so relevant to our mission and to our UU principles. We hope that you will give generously and know that your generosity is received, like your presence here with all of us, with gratitude. I should unmute before I say, thank you, Fran, that was lovely. For our meditation today, I've decided we should learn a mudra. A mudra, according to Wikipedia, is a symbolic or ritual pose or gesture. Mudras are commonly practiced in several Southern and Eastern Asian religious traditions, and most mudras are done with the hands and fingers. You've probably seen them in pictures or on statues. Some mudras, however, like this one by a UU minister named the Reverend Karen Herring, involve the whole body. So I invite you to sit or stand for this practice as you are most comfortable, whether you are here in the sanctuary or at home. And I'll tell you, we are going to go through it 3 times. So maybe you want to start sitting and then stand up when you feel ready. But let's see how this goes.
This is a winter mudra that I share with you. It's adapted from one created by C.L. Tewksbury. And I will run through it 3 times. The first time I will go straight through it. And a mudra being just an embodied meditation with motions and words together. So the first time I'll run through it straight through. Then I'll do it a second time with an explanation, step by step. And a third time straight through again so that you can learn it. May I rest in the stillness of winter. May I cherish my body, my dreams and intuitions. Guide me from fear to courage. Teach me to see deep into the mirror of my soul. So now I'll run through it with some explanation. You always want to begin with your feet about shoulder length apart. You can't see mine, but that's where they are, with your knees just slightly flexed and a little bounce to them just for stability. Stand with the crown of your head open to the energy above and the soles of your feet open to the energy from the earth below. Even if you're inside, draw it up and let it run through you up and down. Take a deep breath before you begin. May I rest, cross your hands in front of you, in the stillness, and imagine a frozen pond, that still sheet of ice in front of you, of winter, and the snow falling slowly down. May I cherish, drawing a big circle and bringing it right back to your heart, my body, my dreams. Winter is a time of so much darkness and dreaming, and the intuition born of it, and intuition. Guide me. Notice it's your own hands guiding you, your own wisdom in correlation with nature and others. Guide me. You take a step forward with both feet. From fear. Fear is always a step backward, out of relationship. So we're being guided away from fear to courage. And feel the courage, the strength there. Teach me to see deep, not outward, but deep inwardly into the mirror of my soul. And the soul is a bird flying from the nest. And then we come back around with the snow falling. We'll do it one more time, straight through. May I rest in the stillness of winter. may I cherish my body, my dreams, and intuitions. Guide me from fear to courage. Teach me to see deep into the mirror of my soul.
I'm sorry, I was muted. Okay. All right, so we're grabbing a little bit more winter today as we're looking towards spring. This plant is starting to bloom, Sandy pointed out to me. But let's pause. Next week, we're going to talk about widening the circle and moving out into the world to do that. Today, I want to talk about the deep work we need to do, both individually and collectively, in order to widen that circle. I really think we need to lean into understanding ourselves, who we are, where we are, and the world around us before we can effectively move to change things. So today we're going deep to go wide. So one of the really useful tools of anti-racism work, especially in Unitarian Universalist circles, but not exclusively at all, you run into it in a lot of places, is a document that was first written in 1999 called White Supremacy Culture. It was a list of characteristics of white supremacy culture. And it's a long list. There are lots of characteristics. And that list, some parts of it are difficult to read, but it's also very useful because it's so practical. It suggests really concrete examples of where these characteristics show up in our culture, and also suggests how to provide an antidote to them, how to practice doing something differently in order to change the way we are enculturated to work, to think, to be, to make decisions in our culture. It is very interesting to me, for the purposes of going deep, that this white supremacy culture description was rewritten, revamped, reworked in May of 2021. The person who first wrote this down worked with had other partners in coming up with this, but the author of the white supremacy characteristics is Tima Okun, Okun. And you can find the current iteration of her work on a website. Karen, maybe somebody can put this in the chat. It's whitesupremacyculture.info. And it's a great website. It'll just browse. You'll hit a lot of important stuff no matter what you click there. But what's really interesting to me is that this is 20 some years old, and we're still living with all the same characteristics that were noted in 1999. And it's not because no one's been working on these things. There's the term white supremacy culture is pretty well known, pretty broadly talked about. A lot of us find it useful and learn as much as we can about it and try to catch ourselves doing things or catch our structures. But it's so hard. So why is that? Why is that? So one of the things that this document does very clearly is to say these are not characteristics of individuals, inherent. This is not the way people are born. This is that white supremacy culture is a social construct. And the good news is that human beings constructed it, and human beings can undo it. We can unconstruct. And I think it's really, really hard because it gets into us, all of us in this culture. When we're really, really young, and it works in our brains, and we know a lot more than we did in 1999 about how the human brain works and how trauma affects us, and about implicit bias. I don't know if any of you have done any training about implicit bias, and it's fascinating. There's a test you can take online, and it actually shows you that quicker than you can think about it and make decisions, your brain has decided that some things are more important or more likely to be right or more worth looking at than other things. And different people are different, but it's not something that happens consciously. It's happening in the sort of sub and unconscious regions of our brains, the very early ones, the ones that are tied to the parts of our brain that are about survival. So it's really hard to fix it. The best we can do, really, I think, is to be aware of it and to try to notice when it comes up in us. And then there's a lot of work about trauma. I don't know that you can read a newspaper or Facebook or through your email inbox these days without seeing something about trauma and somebody's work on trauma. And one of the best things I think that has come out of this, and it's a really complex field, and I'm not going to teach you about trauma right now. But one of the best things I learned from the reading I have done is to reframe the tendency to look at bad behavior or patterns of thought that make no sense to us being exhibited by other people, of course, not by us. Although we do this to ourselves as well. And to change the first reaction is often, what's wrong with you? How could you do that? How could you say that? And actually, now that I think about it, we do say, what's wrong with me a lot too. Where did that come from? What is wrong with me? But that understanding of trauma as something that often happens very young and is overwhelming to the person and creates certain defense structures in the brain, creates it creates responses that can't just be easily unthought. They're there. They become part of a person's personality in some respects, which doesn't mean they can't be changed. It just means they can't be changed easily. They can't just be changed by thinking about them. So a book by Dr. Bruce Perry and, believe it or not, Oprah Winfrey that I read suggested that the real question we should be asking when we're dealing with people who may have been influenced by trauma, and I would argue that is everybody I know who's human. And you know what? We probably shouldn't cut out the non-human people. But we seem to be really talented at holding on to the effects of trauma as human beings. But the question should not be, what's wrong with you? How can we fix you? What do we need? You need to try harder. How are you not good enough? The question really is, what happened to you? And people who understand how trauma works can actually work with people to discover what happened and how to change the circumstances in someone's life by understanding what triggers them and help them create new connections in their brains. And people in the room here and online who are scientists know how to talk about that much better than I do. But I am convinced that this is part of why it is so hard for us to address racism and oppressive structures, racism, homophobia, sexism, all of the isms. I'm not even going to try to list because I will miss them, many of them that are important. It's hard because a lot of it is wired into our brains. And encountering difference, there's a survival mechanism. It keeps 2-year-olds from eating things they haven't met before that says, ooh, difference, I should be careful. Something new, ooh, I need to be careful. It's there because it sometimes keeps human beings alive. And it creates huge problems for us once we are actually living where we live as mostly adults, more or less, most days, most times, who have a fair amount of control over our environment. We're probably not going in the next hour to starve or have a rock fall on us or a tree limb or something like that, but we still sometimes we hear or see something different and go, or maybe, and we may not even be aware of it. So this, I think, is why it's difficult. And this is why we need to go deep. We need a lot of the fundamentally basic, I'm being redundant here, work of anti-oppression is about seeing ourselves and working with ourselves and being willing to see what is. Pema Chodron, who's an American Buddhist teacher, has this to say. I forget where I got this quotation. Somebody put it electronically in front of my eyes and I wrote it down. She says, as people who want to live a good, full, unrestricted, adventurous, real kind of life, it's like, sign me up, a good, full, unrestricted, adventurous, real kind of life. People wanting that, she says, there is concrete instruction we can follow. See what is. And if it was just that easy, she wouldn't have written however many books she's written. But that's essentially what Buddhism is about. And I want to add to that a little bit because we're using seeing here. Sorry, it's a new microphone. I keep hitting it. I will try not to. We use seeing as a metaphor. And some of us see better than others and some see worse. And some of us don't even think it visually the way everybody else does. So I want to expand her instruction and say, we need to see what is, but we also need to hear it. We need to feel what is. And I'm going to come back to feelings. We need to touch what is. Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, one thing you can do is to go out every day, kneel on the ground and deeply touch it. He said, this is a wonderfully calming, centering, grounding practice, and everybody could do it. But that touch, we need to touch what is. We all miss being together with our bodies. And, and that's because we're wired to touch what is in the world, and we need to taste what is in the world. And all of these, can be literal or they can be metaphorical. For instance, I talk about the texture of our lives having changed drastically in the last 10, 15 years. So all of those can be used that way. But anyway, so we're not just wanting to see what is. For you, it may be hearing what is that resonates. For me, feeling what is real big right now, and touching what is always appealing to me. Tasting, whatever. Smelling, smell what is. Oof. That's actually one of those things that's subconsciously much more powerful than we consciously recognize a lot of times. So this sounds easy. You read children's books and they're all about the senses and, see and feel and taste and hear and smell. And it's not really a toddler's project. It's a project for all of us. And some of that is because the culture we live in has trained us out of seeing what is. Partly because if we really see what is, and this is just my own personal summary of it, if we really see, feel, hear, taste, smell the real good stuff in life, we won't respond to advertising. We won't buy stuff. We won't make other people money. And that's my shortcut answer. for what is white supremacy. It is supremacy culture. It is culture that serves a few by manipulating everyone, and it damages everyone. That's really clear. All the people who write about white supremacy culture say things like, this is the water in which we are all swimming. And the commitment, Tima Okun says, our commitment to racial justice is a healing practice for all aspects of our lives. And the our there is everyone. Everyone. So I'll just give you a really quick run through of just sort of one or two word versions of some of the characteristics of white supremacy, so that it doesn't sound all mysterious. White supremacy culture is characterized by fear, perfectionism, the idea that there was one right way to do things, either or thinking or binary thinking, denial and defensiveness, because remember, there's only one right way and it's good to be right, right? So then when somebody says, oh, you did this and I don't like it, then we have to defend why it was right, right? Okay. Fear of conflict, the assumption of a right to comfort, individualism, the equation of progress with being more and better than lack of progress, the idea of valuing quantity over quality, worship of the written word. You use love words, we love them. So we should listen to that one sometimes. And an urgency, a constant sense of urgency that whatever it is I am doing, which I figured out was the right thing to do, remember, it's really urgent. And it overshadows my need to rest, my own need to rest, which is what makes me able to show up to be with you. And this urgency is applied to everything. It isn't just applied to the really urgent things, like creating justice in the world. It's applied to getting the newsletter done on time. It's equated to making sure dinner is ready. You can make your own lists. It's going to be different. And I know I do this all the time. My children need to connect with me and I'm like, oh, can you just wait? I really have to do this. And if I don't do it now, it won't ever get done and I'll be a bad person. So if you see in those, all of those characteristics are ways that those are values within our culture that are applied in many, many, many places in order to privilege some people, the people who are good at playing those games, who, guess what, in our culture tend to be middle class and owning class white people. They play this game well. They're taught early on, and they have the resources to play the game well. They have the resources to not have to carry heavy consequences for the mistakes they make that put them outside of this culture, right? But it's everywhere. This is the air we breathe, the water we swim in. And if you're going to talk about fear, I mean, that is so intensely personal, and it's my biology that causes my fear. And so somehow we are being called, when we're called to the work of anti-racism, to untangle some of the connections in our brain, in deep parts of our brain. We're being called to notice or to listen when other people notice and try to help us, really help us. They are often not, as we're assuming, just trying to put themselves forward or fight for their share of things. Sometimes they are working to help us be more who we can be, to be our best selves. And some of the things that scare us about anti-racism, anti-oppression work are these ideas of accountability and judgment, the word responsibility and accountability, both of those words carry, I think, for many of us, the idea of being wrong. Remember that there's one right way. I have a funny story about me. Somewhere back in my 20s or something, I remember sitting with a therapist and realizing, oh, in my family, I think we recognize pretty thoroughly often that there's more than one right way to do anything. But what I learned is that there's a best right way. And so I spent a lot of my life being anxious about being able to do a right thing the best way. And it's a losing proposition. It really, really is. It makes you crazy. Fortunately, I had support and I got over, well, sort of, sometimes when I'm not too stressed, that tendency to go looking for the best right way. And I remind myself often, there's more than two answers here. There might be 3 or 4 or 5 options. It's always more than two, that binary, because that goes with, right and wrong. So we have to just always be attending to ourselves. For me, I was going to say the final frontier, and that would just be silly. The current frontier is feelings. That's the structure of my personality is such that I actually like thinking about things. I like reading about them. I like talking about them. I like throwing ideas around with people. I would rather not actually feel my feelings. And again, part of this is cultural and part of it really, truly, I play with Myers-Briggs and the Enneagram and stuff. And yeah, the place I come out on is the people who don't really like to do feelings. So that is, long decades into my life, I am learning to look for ways to be with my feelings. And when I find them, it's not that scary. We can do this. We can. Whatever it is we've always stayed away from because we worried it was going to get us into trouble. It was going to make us look not good, not right, not competent, not efficient, not worthy. We can play with doing them anyway for no reason other than they are part of what is for us. Going back to Pema Chodron there, if we want to have a full, adventurous, what else was it? Good, unrestricted life. I want an unrestricted life. So guess what? I'm trying to learn how to feel grief. I'm trying to learn how to feel sad. I'm trying to learn what to do when these things I'm not used to come rolling through my life. And we can all learn that. And I think we're not going to change the culture of white supremacy until we all, everybody, until we all start learning how to be with those parts of ourselves that we've learned somewhere were not okay, and learn how to extend grace to ourselves, to explore that, to learn to make room for it. My experience has been when I make room for that stuff, there's more room for joy too. Surprises happen. I do things, I feel things I didn't know were there. So it's worth doing. And I think when I learn how to do all that, I get less worried about being right, because I know those were just my feelings and you don't have them because your life is different. You had different experiences. You're wanting to feel or do or be or think things comes out of your life, which is not my life and doesn't need to be. And we're going to do different things. And I don't have to say, yuck, I don't like that, because I never saw it before. I can just say, oh, there's your thing. Where'd that come from? Maybe you have a good story to tell me. People do sometimes, if you're not all wound up in judging them and having to decide what is right and what is better. So this, I think, is part of what we have to do in order to do anti-oppression work. We're going to talk next week about the 8th principle, which is an expansion of the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism that has been proposed by some of our siblings of color within the Unitarian Universalist movement. And a good number of congregations, I'll look that up by next week, many congregations within the Unitarian Universalist Association have adopted the 8th principle and just added it to the 7 they were already considering themselves committed to. So we're going to think about that. And what do I want to leave with? I think this is something, my experience with Unitarian Universalists is that sometimes this feels like a dangerous topic. We feel like, oh, we found the people who do this all right. We do social justice. We're aware of oppression. We declare that we are anti-oppressive. Why do we have to think more about it? And we have to think more about it. I'll talk more next week about it. Partly because it is part of what is, but more immediately, people among us, other Unitarian Universalists, people of color, people with non-cis, non-binary identities have told us that they hurt. And these are our siblings in faith. These are people with whom we stand in covenant. And so when they have the courage to stand up and say, something doesn't feel right here, we need to talk, then we need to talk. And we can do that. We can do that. We are big enough. There is space within our movement and within our souls to do that work. So welcome once again to the adventure. I know this is not new territory for anybody in this room, anybody joining us by Zoom. But let's see, where are we right now? What does now feel like to us? What does now taste like? What is now calling us to experience, to see, to hear? We're going to talk about it. So here's to the journey. And here's to knowing that we are in good company. May we have courage and go deep into our souls. Amen. May it be so. So we have what I think, and I hope you will enjoy, a wonderful musical response. We know Leah Morris because we've used some of her work for Time for All Sages and some songs. And I found a song that she wrote a little more than a year ago. She wrote it like within a day of Biden's inauguration. And it was a response, a musical response to Amanda Gorman's poem. But it is also what I hope for us as we dive in a little deeply to this work. So here's Leah Morris, Be the Light.
There is always a light when we are ready to see it. There is always a light when we are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night, to climb this hill, together we will. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to see it. There is always a light in the dark. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always a light. There is always a light. We are ready to see it. There is always a light. There is always a light. We are ready to be it. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a gift. Together we will. There is always light. There is always dark. There is always light. There is always dark. To see the light, to be the light, to raise our eyes in the dark of night and be a climb this hill. Together we will. There is always light. There is always dark. There is always shine. There is always shine. Be the light.
Now we come to the time in the service when we share joys and concerns with each other. For those of you joining us by YouTube, we're so glad you're here.